Welcome to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. I'm Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe, and I'm joined now by investigative reporter Sierra Cummings. And Sierra, this is a story you've been working on for some time now, and it's about FRT, which most people don't know that acronym. It stands for Facial Recognition Technology. First off, I want to ask why you were interested in this subject before we get into a series of stories.
Really, it's a part of the conversation related to artificial intelligence. So that is such a buzzword socially right now. But the more immediate interest I had was about 2 years ago. We had heard from a local law enforcement, Cobb County Police Department. They announced on social media that they were seeking a contract with a facial recognition technology company, and they were seeking from County Commission approval for a 2 to 3 year contract. At that time, there was significant social media backlash. There were so many comments from families, advocates saying, we are against this. You need to hold off on using this. And at that time, actually, Cobb County listened. They took it off the agenda. There was no consideration any longer from the commission to approve that 2 to 3 year contract. And we learned in that time they worked with some advocates and experts to formulate a policy that would make sense in their police work when or if they should use the technology. Once they got all of that in order, they went before the commission and saw approval. And that's when we continued to do our digging. What really is this technology? Why are people upset? And what does it mean to have inherent bias embedded in the technology?
Well, before we look at the piece, you just mentioned artificial intelligence. And look, in law enforcement all the way throughout history since there have been lineups, you've had misidentification of suspects, and that's the inherent bias sometimes in the human. But we're talking about basically a robot that is deciding whether or not the face matches from surveillance video or elsewhere, right?
Yeah, it's really important. I think somebody gave me such great perspective during this project, and they said a lot of times people think technology creates a new problem, when really it's exposing or exacerbating a problem that was already there. And so when you think about technology, it has to be built by a human. And as humans, we have our own biases and prejudices and our own blind spots. So naturally, that flows into the technology, and you need some kind of oversight and accountability to minimize the harm.
Let's play the story. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Their surveillance is silent, but the video speaks for itself. March 26, 2022, a passenger boards a Maryland public transit bus. Police records detail a dispute over face mask. After arguing, the passenger snatches the driver's phone and leaves. The driver follows the suspect off, trying to get her phone back. The man hits her repeatedly. Maryland Transit Authority police immediately issue this, an alert to Baltimore area law enforcement, a screenshot of the suspect.
How you doing, sir?
5 days later, police make an arrest.
These gentlemen have a warrant for your arrest. For, I'm not sure.
Charging Alonzo Sawyer with robbery and assault. U.S. Marshals take him into custody for the crime Transit PD says he committed.
Hey, you got me baffled. I work, so I don't understand. I'm not even living out here.
The suspect remains confused about why he's being arrested.
Sit tight for me, all right?
Handcuffed in the back of a police car. The drive
It was a long ride.
was unlike any other.
My mind was racing all over the place, and I don't know, man. It's like a feeling that I never had before. I was real scared.
Scared because he should not have been arrested in the first place. Facial recognition identified him as the suspect, according to detectives. An incident report outlines Alonzo's former probation officer and a state trooper ID'd him too.
And I kept telling them, that's not me. That's not me. I don't even ride a bus.
Even the victim herself told police it wasn't him. After looking at this photo lineup, right under Alonzo's image, she wrote, "Not the person who assaulted me." The 56-year-old father was jailed
Really traumatic,
with no bond
sitting there being so frantic.
for 9 days.
I had to prove my husband innocent.
It took his own wife, Karan Sawyer, going back to law enforcement.
This guy's short, way shorter than my husband. The outfit, the face, I mean, this is not him.
Incident reports describe the actual suspect, who since pled guilty to the robbery, was positively ID'd by his own mom. Alonzo says the alleged criminal does kind of look like him. But that shouldn't be enough because according to Atlanta experts, facial recognition or artificial intelligence can be biased.
I'm almost ashamed to say it. I never really thought about the victim that looks like me.
Atlanta engineer Calvin Lawrence has created the same facial recognition used by some police across the country. Even he admits its flaws.
It really kind of goes back to the fact that the training models, the data that was inputted, and who inputted the data is built to mimic human behavior. So you train it.
Training algorithms is the work happening right here in this Georgia Tech lab, where researchers are proving bias can exist in technology. To showcase just how software can amplify racial disparities, they built this robotic arm.
So these are your eyes.
Professor Matthew Gomble.
Robots, you can kind of think about when a child is born, they're not like good or bad.
It was tasked with grabbing the box with the criminal pictured on it. One had an image of a white male, on the other, a black male. The researchers then built an algorithm based on mugshots, websites with divisive rhetoric, social media posts, disproportionate negative data about black people.
What's the robot going to do?
So when the robot was told to choose the criminal, over and over, it selected the blackface.
The internet taught the machine that there is a more likely relationship that a person would think that a black person is a criminal and that a white person would not be.
The whole point of the study, what goes in will come out. The algorithms used in this experiment are similar to that of facial recognition, meaning if FRT systems have disproportionate data in them or software that hasn't been trained enough on people of color, false matches will continue.
Public regulation bodies are going to need to be involved.
Call for oversight, the exact sentiment shared by the growing list of the wrongfully accused.
To wake up one day, what if I'd have been accused of murder? You know what I mean? And if it hadn't have been for my wife, you know, doing the legwork for me, I just would have got lost in the system.
Some of the calls for regulation are coming from lawmakers themselves. This month, a Georgia Senate study committee just began talks on how to regulate the use of AI across multiple industries. But some leaders argue there needs to be a study committee solely focused on facial recognition. As for Alonzo's case, the family told me they want an apology. Maryland law enforcement did not respond to several of my specific questions. However, the state's county attorney justified the arrest, saying prior, the probation officer ID'd Alonzo. We should note that probation officer later recanted. In the studio, I'm Sierra Cummings, Atlanta News First. Obviously, this is such an emotional story because you think about the fathers who have been wrongfully accused, not only wrongfully accused, but wrongfully jailed for sometimes weeks at a time. In this case, Alonzo being in jail for 9 days. Your heart just really breaks for that family because that's 9 days missed just living their regular, normal lives at home.
And it permanently scars someone. This isn't, I mean, because to be in jail for 9 days is one thing. To be wrongfully jailed for basically a racist robot deciding you've committed a crime you didn't commit, I mean, that's a lot more of a cost than just 9 days of freedom.
Yeah, there's this psychological impact. I mean, sometimes he's just living his life and he sees police officers on the road and he just has this kind of visceral response because he remembers when he was arrested and wrongfully accused. So it really has that emotional part of this issue. But I thought a fun part of the story was kind of learning about Georgia Tech's research, them developing that robot. You saw that robotic arm choosing the box. And
it's based on how it's trained, but it's trained from all of the existing
algorithms.
And those are from the real world, which has an inherent racial bias or inherent bias built into it.
Yeah, and it's really hard to kind of understand what really is an algorithm. I'm no tech expert. That's not what my degree is in by any means, but some way to really easily understand this really was talking to the Georgia Tech researchers who essentially said, you know, we're building an equation based off of the things that are populated online, social media, news websites, divisive websites, just pulling all of these things, mugshots. And really what happened was there was this disproportionate negative data for people of color. And so you kind of pour all of that into an equation and you teach or train the robot to make a decision based off that equation. And you saw that robot more often than not chose the criminal as the blackface, when really I think the point that the audience needs to understand is that should the robotic arm be tasked with choosing the criminal, the robotic arm should have done nothing. It's not that it should have chose the white face. It should have done nothing because the boxes had nothing to do with a criminal on it. It's just a white male face and a black male face, and the further research goes into a white doll and a black doll. Really, the robot should be doing nothing, but the way that it's trained, that algorithm is telling them, well, more than likely this dark face is associated with dark meaning. So I'm
because
gonna go
that's
with
its
this.
experience. Yeah, but that's what an algorithm is, and that's what artificial intelligence is. It's machine learning. The machine is learning from its input. So I do want to, before we get to solutions and your next story, I want to ask you about sort of the process here, not just your process, but the process that is used to train FRT. Where are they getting the photos? So where are they getting the sort of samples to run on these, surveillance videos, et cetera? What's the database that's training the FRT computer?
Yeah, so far when it comes to the private tech companies, they use a practice called scraping. So as long as the image has been posted publicly, so say if you have
like a profile pic,
a private Facebook, but then you choose to post a photo publicly, that is a part of the database, the pool of photos. We're learning more about governments who use facial recognition technology, and you'll be surprised to learn what their data pool is. But just generally speaking, these private companies that have the pool set, anytime you post a public photo, whether it's a mugshot or on your social media, it now can go into that database.
And one more thing about that is that if they're using existing mugshots, booking photos, there already is a disproportionate number of people of color because of all of the other issues of race that have plagued law enforcement and the justice system for, more than a century now.
You're absolutely right. It almost feels like the cards are just automatically stacked up against a certain population. But that really does bring us to the solutions, right? We want to hear what can be done. And so this next story, we talked to our local lawmakers at the state capitol about ways they can regulate AI in police work.
You are under arrest.
All arrested, jailed, and accused of a robbery crime they didn't commit.
Police used facial recognition technology to wrongfully link them to suspects.
You have to prove yourself innocent.
Innocent fathers arrested in front of their children removed from their own homes, case after case on wrongful warrants because software identified them as suspects.
It was awful, quite frankly.
Georgia Senator Harold Jones.
They basically just looked at the fact that they had the facial recognition and that was it.
Outraged by what Atlanta News First investigations exposed, the former prosecutor argues statewide regulation must determine how law enforcement uses the software.
A person literally could be arrested by the laws we make or don't make.
Right now, facial recognition businesses only provide suggested guidance for police. Even so,
we can't rely on a private sector company because they're actually performing a public service. The police actually need cooperating evidence. So this should just be one tool.
Explaining the matches from facial recognition should not be the means for a decision in a criminal case, as so often an algorithm results in false matches. Georgia State University research confirming the technology is more likely to get it wrong with people of color. That reality especially disturbing to State Representative Terry Cummings.
The possibility of abuse and people being arrested unnecessarily.
Concerning not only because she's a former criminal justice professor and a former attorney for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but also
I'm an identical twin, so I already get mistaken. We already get mistaken a lot.
Mistaken identity, a risk too great, she says, when so much is on the line.
You literally have somebody's freedom in your hands and their lives. And when you make those mistakes, it has lifelong consequences. And sometimes those people don't come home.
Although both lawmakers sit on the General Assembly's public safety committees, unlike Senator Jones, who believes the policy must start at the state capitol, Representative Cummings wants legislation to first come from the nation's capital.
Welcome all to today's hearing.
The panel in this U.S. Senate artificial intelligence hearing agree.
It is imperative that Congress understand the full range of risks and potentials.
Expert witnesses highlighting our findings.
Georgia resident Randall Reed was held in jail for 6 days. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, because right now people don't know when it's an AI tool, when it's face recognition that's being used to generate their arrest.
The opinions among leaders vary.
It's not going to see action until Congress steps in to legislate.
But even facial recognition developers themselves, right here in Atlanta, call for oversight on how the officers are trained, what pictures can be used, and under which circumstances.
So, Sierra, we know what the legislature, the General Assembly, might be doing about this. At least they're on, sort of alert, in large part thanks to your reporting. But what can I do as a citizen? Is there anything I can do to opt out of any of these programs? Is there anything I can do in the way I do social media so that my face isn't sort of out there as a sample running against potential criminal suspects?
I mean, yes and no. Privacy experts tell me they are shocked to see how loud we live our lives online. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I go to dinner and I post my location. I post pictures with friends. My social media pages are all public for our viewers. So, I mean, there are things that you can do, just small steps you can take. If you wanted to keep your Facebook private, you could do that. But on the flip side, if your friend decides to tag you in a photo and their page is public, then that automatically goes to the public database.
Well, you can turn that off, though, can't you?
You can. So just
but
they
really can get it from their page.
Yes, right. Yeah, you just got to kind of be alert of the settings that you choose on your profile and also the settings on that particular photo. But really, we're kind of at the mercy of the regulation that should or should not come from all of this discussion.
Yeah, in 2023 and 2024, the idea of living offline it's not possible. I mean, if you order an Uber, they've got your address. If you order, food delivered to your house, they know where you live. If everyone's worried about the government tracking you. The government isn't tracking you. We're tracking ourselves. Yeah, if you check in at a restaurant or leave a review, they know where you were and when you were there. So it's really hard to do that. I do want to ask you this because obviously this story in your process is sort of critically examining the process of FRT and the costs and effects when they get it wrong. In your analysis, or at least in your reporting, did you come across benefits, people, legitimate convicted criminals who were caught by FRT? And is there an analysis where the cost-benefit analysis where actually the technology in the final analysis is good or not?
That's a completely fair question, and that's something that we are spending a lot more time digging into, because if you are the victim or you're the family of the victim of a crime, you're not going to go tell police, you know what, solve my crime, but if you've got to use this one technology, don't do it, right? Because the priority is justice. You want some kind of resolution for your case. So it really is important to look at the times where it was done successfully and why it was done successfully. And so far from what we've examined, when this tool has helped in a correct arrest and as far as a conviction, it was used simply as that. A tool.
A tool,
was not correct. It wasn't the end all be all. It wasn't the means to make the arrest or to go try to get the warrant or to even try to go get witnesses to confirm somebody in a lineup. And so we're following a case right now, and the family is just so grateful that local law enforcement at the time took kind of initiative to talk to the witnesses on scene, see if they had any pictures of the potential suspects. And they ran that through a system. And that was just one of the things that the detective did. He got text messages, cell phone records, GPS records confirming where that suspect was at the time. And ultimately, that led to an arrest and ultimately a conviction. And so, there is something to be said about the times where it's done correctly. And, this technology is out there already. Cat's out of the bag, can't put the genie back in the bottle. most law enforcement say it is here to stay. So it is about informing our usage of it.
And like you said, it's just a point of information, almost like a tip.
Yeah.
But you've got to get the totality of the circumstances to generate what in the legal sphere they call reasonable suspicion,
Right.
probable cause, and then, of course, beyond a reasonable doubt. One other thing is I noticed you saw that some departments have policies that require a human to sort of not only review it, but sort of make the call so that the computer isn't picking, basically the computer isn't convicting, a suspect. It's the system with this as sort of a hint or a tip.
Yeah, and there's also that element of confirmation bias. Like once you get that match in the system, the detective's like, well, I've got that match, so I'm going to just try to find evidence that supports that and potentially refute any evidence that it opposes that. But what's really important here is that the times where we've seen agencies experience a downfall related to this technology is when there isn't a policy. I think, the private companies at least tell me when they give law enforcement access to the technology, they tell them to only use it as a tip or a lead or a tool. But that's kind of relying on trust that the agency is going to do that. And you hope and you trust that the agency will, but really there has to be a standardized policy, standard operating procedures, those kind of things in place. And one could argue, unless you have some kind of mandate requiring that, i.e. regulation, it's going to be like a flimsy patchwork of here and there. Maybe some agencies don't, maybe some agencies do. So far in the cases we examined where there were wrongful arrests, there were no policies in place.
Unbelievable. Sierra Cummings, thanks for sharing your process. Thanks for offering solutions. And more than anything, thanks for your impactful investigative reporting. You've been watching Behind the Investigation. I'm with Sierra Cummings. This is Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe. Be sure to listen to this as a podcast. So, hey, you don't have the time to stream it on Atlanta News First Plus or on YouTube. You can download this and listen to it in the car. Of course, hands-free, especially in Georgia where it's the law, wherever you get your podcasts.